There's something strange that almost nobody talks about, but that a lot of people feel, and maybe are feeling it right now without being able to put it into words, which is this: saving a little bit of money sometimes causes more anxiety than having nothing at all. It sounds absurd to say it out loud, because logic says that any amount saved should bring relief, security, peace of mind. But in practice, when you start seeing that money sitting there, growing slowly, something changes inside your head. Before, when you had nothing, the thought was simple: I don't have it, so I just keep living. Now, when there's an amount there, even if it's small, fear shows up. Fear of losing it. Fear of needing to use it. Fear of doing something wrong and watching it disappear. Fear of going back to zero. And that fear starts to take up a huge amount of space in your mind, often much bigger than the money you've actually saved. Maybe you've lived this already. You start excited, save the first 100, then 500, then 1,000. And instead of feeling proud, you start feeling tense. Every expense turns into an internal argument. Every unexpected situation becomes a mini panic. You start opening your bank app several times a day, not to plan, but to check if the money is still there, as if someone could steal it just because you weren't looking. And the cruelest part of all this is that nobody warned you this phase existed. Everyone talks about the happiness of having money saved, but almost nobody talks about this middle stretch, this strange place where you're no longer completely broke, but you also don't feel safe. And this is exactly where a lot of people get stuck, because the person starts thinking something is wrong with them. Why can't I relax even though I have money saved? Why do I get so nervous when I need to touch this money? Will I never feel calm? And without realizing it, that anxiety starts to affect simple day-to-day decisions. You put off important things. You accept bad situations out of fear of spending. You stop investing in yourself because everything feels like too big a risk. The money that was supposed to help starts to become a constant source of mental pressure. The problem isn't you. The problem is that nobody explained how the brain works at this stage. Our brains are wired to avoid losses far more than to seek gains. When you have nothing, there's nothing to lose. When you start saving, even a little, the brain goes into alert mode. It's not celebrating progress. It's trying to protect what was earned with effort. And that effort, you know this well, wasn't small. It meant giving things up, saying no, holding back desires, getting angry at the grocery store, with bills, with surprises. So when that money appears, the brain treats it almost like something fragile, something that could break at any moment. And that's why so many people start saving and stop halfway. Not because it's impossible to reach $10,000, but because the path to get there messes with emotions nobody prepared you to face. The person starts full of plans, but halfway through feels mentally exhausted, tense, afraid of making mistakes, and little by little starts sabotaging their own progress. Spends a little here, a little there, then gives up on tracking. And when they realize it, they're almost back where they started. Then comes the guilt, the quiet sense of failure, that idea of, I can't do this, it doesn't work for me, I'm bad with money. But there's a huge difference between not knowing how to do the math and not knowing how to deal with the psychological pressure of money. Most people don't fail because they earn too little or lack discipline. They fail because they're trying to save the wrong way, with the wrong mindset, believing that saving is just a matter of willpower, when in reality it's much more about mental structure and environment. And as long as you don't understand that any formula turns into suffering. Maybe you clicked on this video thinking you were going to hear another list of rules, like cut this, stop that, save this much per month. But the truth is, if it were just that, you would have fixed your financial life a long time ago. Information isn't the problem. The problem is living with the constant feeling that any wrong decision could throw you back into the hole. Waking up thinking about money, going to sleep thinking about money, working with the feeling that you're always behind, that it's never enough, that all your effort seems to go nowhere. And that's exactly why the idea of saving $10,000 scares so many people. Not because of the number itself, but because of the emotional weight it carries. 10,000 feels distant. It feels like another reality. It feels like something reserved for people who earn a lot, who got lucky, who were born into better conditions. And when you try to imagine yourself getting there, the first thing that comes up isn't pride, it's fear. Fear of failing along the way, fear of not being able to handle it, fear of being disappointed one more time. But there's one thing that changes everything, and almost nobody talks about it. Reaching the first few thousand is the hardest part emotionally, not financially. It's the stretch where the brain is still in survival mode, where every expense feels like a threat, where any fluctuation creates stress. And while you're stuck in that mode, any formula will feel too heavy. Money doesn't become a tool, it becomes tension. And this is where an important shift comes in, one that many people only understand after making a lot of mistakes. The goal of saving money isn't the money itself, not at the beginning. The real goal is to get out of a constant state of alert. It's to allow your mind to function without fear all the time. It's to create a minimum space of safety, so decisions stop being reactive and start being conscious. But for that to happen, you can't save in just any way. You can't save and live afraid to touch it. You can't treat every cent as sacred. Most people try to save as if they're fighting themselves, as if every expense were an enemy, as if living were a mistake. And that's exhausting. It wears you down. It breaks any plan in the medium term, because nobody can live at war with themselves for very long. At your point, the body asks for rest. And that rest almost always comes in the form of impulsive spending, giving up, or completely abandoning financial control. Maybe you recognize this cycle. You start organized, then you get too rigid, then you blow up, then you feel guilty, then you promise to start again on Monday, next month, next year, and time passes, the paycheck comes in and goes out. Life moves on, but you feel like you're always in the same place, working, trying, but not building anything solid. And the saddest part is that this has nothing to do with lack of ability. It has to do with the lack of a system that works in favor of your mind, not against it. Because when a system depends only on your willpower, you lose. Always. Not because you're weak, but because you're human, tired, overloaded, full of worries beyond money. There's a very specific point where everything starts to change. It's not magical, it's not fast, but it's real. It's the point where money stops being an emotional threat and starts becoming a practical tool, where you stop thinking, what if it runs out, and start thinking, how can this make my life easier? Where small problems stop turning into huge crimes, where surprises stop stealing your sleep. And getting to that point doesn't depend on earning more. It depends on how you build the path to get there. The formula for saving $10,000 doesn't start with numbers. It starts with your head. It starts by understanding why saving a little hurts more than saving nothing. It starts by accepting that this discomfort is part of the process, but it doesn't have to be permanent. It starts by changing how you relate to saved money, not as something untouchable, but as a shock absorber for your life. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand exactly what this turning point is. How to get through this phase without losing your mind, and how to turn saving into something that brings relief instead of anxiety. But before that, we need to talk about the silent mistakes almost everyone makes along this path, mistakes that seem small, but keep you stuck in this state of tension for years without you realizing it. There's a very common mistake that almost everyone makes when they decide to save, and it's so socially accepted that nobody questions it. That mistake is believing that saving money means squeezing life. People associate saving with suffering, with giving things up, with living less, with punishing yourself now so maybe you can live better in the future. And when you enter that logic, without realizing it, you create a relationship of rejection with your own financial plan. Every dollar saved becomes a reminder of what you didn't do. Every conscious decision becomes a small accumulated frustration. And then something curious happens. You can keep it up for a while, a few months, sometimes even a year, but the mental cost keeps growing because you're still living the same exhausting routine, the same problems, the same job, the same worries, just with fewer release valves, fewer small pleasures, less sense of reward. And the brain starts to collect its debt. It doesn't understand spreadsheets. It understands survival and relief. So at some point, it demands compensation. That's when the expenses that seem to come out of nowhere appear. It's not lack of control. It's exhaustion. It's the mind trying to rebalance an emotional scale that's been leaning only towards sacrifice. The person buys something they didn't really need, orders food on a random day, spends on something that soon after brings guilt, and the worst part isn't the expense itself. The worst part is the internal dialogue that follows. I ruined everything. I'm disorganized. There's no point in trying. That dialogue erodes confidence. And without confidence, no financial plan survives. Another silent mistake is treating all saved money as one single thing. Everything gets mixed together. Emergency fund, dreams, future, goals, everything in the same place with the same emotional weight. And when everything is one thing, any need becomes a huge dilemma. If the car breaks down, you don't think I'll use the reserve for this. You think I'm going to destroy everything I built. The brain doesn't separate. It only sees loss. And that makes you even more afraid to touch the money, even when it was saved exactly for that kind of situation. That constant fear creates a strange behavior. The person has money saved, but keeps living as if they don't. They keep accepting problems that could be solved with a little money. They keep postponing simple solutions. They keep accumulating stress, and the money sitting there doesn't fulfill its main role, which isn't to earn interest, or grow, or impress anyone, but to reduce the emotional impact of real life. Few people realize this, but money wasn't made to look pretty in an account. It was made to absorb shocks, to turn emergencies into inconveniences, to prevent a small problem from becoming an emotional snowball. When you prevent money from doing that job, you stay in alert mode even after saving, and that creates the confusing feeling of, I did everything right, but I still feel bad. Then comes another mistake that seems logical, but is extremely cruel. Setting goals that are too big without psychological milestones along the way. $10,000 becomes a distant, almost abstract number. Something that always feels far away no matter how much you move forward. You start at 0, reach 1,000, and instead of feeling progress, you feel frustration because there are still 9 left. You reach 2, still 8 left, and so on. The brain doesn't celebrate what's been done. It only sees what's missing, and living constantly with a sense of lack is emotionally exhausting. That's why so many people give up when they were actually doing well. Not because money stopped being left over, but because it stopped making emotional sense. The effort didn't seem proportional to the relief. The sacrifice felt bigger than the reward. And without emotional reward, the brain loses interest. But there's a silent shift that starts to happen when you understand something very simple. Saving isn't accumulating. It's organizing chaos. It's not stacking money. It's creating mental space. It's reducing noise. It's lowering the number of urgent decisions you have to make every month. It's trading improvisation for predictability, but that doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers. At first, saved money still carries fear. Then it starts to carry possibility. And only later does it become peace of mind. The problem is that most people try to jump straight to peace without respecting these phases. And when they can't, they think they failed. But they didn't fail. They just tried to live a stage they hadn't emotionally built yet. There's a value, a specific threshold where something changes inside your head. It's not a magic number that's the same for everyone, but the mechanism is the same. Up to that point, money feels fragile. After it, money starts to feel functional. Before any expense is a threat, after some expenses become tools. Before you think I can't mess up. After you think I have some margin, and that feeling of margin completely changes how you face problems. It's at this moment that small decisions start to get easier. You stop negotiating with yourself all the time. You stop feeling guilty about every choice. You stop living in fear of the next surprise. And not because you got rich, but because you left constant survival mode. Your brain understands that there's a cushion, a buffer, a gap between the problem and despair. But to get to that point, it's not enough to just save money. You have to save it the right way, at the right pace, with the right structure. Otherwise, you accumulate numbers, but keep accumulating tension along with them. And then, before you realize it, you're too tired to continue. Even though you're close to a turning point that could change everything, most people never cross this threshold. Not because it's impossible, but because nobody explains that it exists. Nobody warns that the initial discomfort isn't a sign of failure, it's a sign of transition. Nobody teaches how to get through this phase without hating yourself, without punishing yourself, without turning life into a financial battlefield. And while that isn't clear, money continues to be seen as a judge instead of an ally, a cop instead of support, something that demands instead of something that helps. And this distorted relationship makes even good salaries disappear because there's no emotional structure to sustain progress. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how this shift happens in practice, how to recognize when you heat close to it. And most importantly, how to build a system that works for you even on days when you're tired, discouraged, or feel like giving up. Because those are exactly the days when the plan needs to work, not the perfect days. There's a very specific moment when a person starts to realize that the problem was never just how much they earned, but how every financial decision was made under pressure. Pressure from time, pressure from fear, pressure from overdue bills, pressure from the constant feeling that any mistake would be fatal. And when all decisions are made in that state, even small decisions become too heavy. Buying something simple becomes guilt. Saying no becomes frustration. Everything is exhausting. When you live like that for years, your brain learns something dangerous. That money is synonymous with stress. It doesn't matter if more or less comes in, the emotional reaction is always the same. Tight chest. Worry, anticipation of problems, and that creates a silent cycle where the person even avoids thinking about money, avoids looking at statements, avoids planning because planning hurts. Planning reminds them of failure. Planning reminds them of everything that's still missing. And that's when financial life starts to be pushed along with your belly. Nothing explodes all at once, but everything is always hanging by a thread. Always at the limit. Always counting the days until the next paycheck. Always hoping nothing goes wrong. Because if it does, they don't know how they'll react. This constant state of alert consumes mental energy. And the person doesn't realize how tired they are until the day they simply can't take it anymore. What almost nobody understands is that money isn't exhausting because of the work it takes to earn it, but because of the mental work it takes to manage it when it's scarce or poorly organized. The mind stays busy with micro decisions all the time. Can I spend this? Should I wait? What if I need it later? What if something happens? This internal conversation never stops. And while it doesn't stop, there's no room to think long term, to plan calmly, to make better decisions. That's why so many people spend years at the same financial level, even while trying hard. It's not lack of effort. It's excess mental noise. The person is always reacting, never acting, always putting out fires, never building structure. And in that scenario, talking about saving $10,000 sounds almost offensive, like a reality too far removed from real life. But the truth is that the path to that amount isn't made of heroic sacrifices. It's made of small, consistent decisions taken outside of panic mode. And to get out of panic mode, you need one thing before any formula: predictability. Not in the sense of knowing exactly how much you'll earn forever, but knowing that certain problems are already solved before they even happen. When predictability starts to exist, even in a small way, something changes. The person starts sleeping better, starts thinking more clearly, starts blaming themselves less for everything, and most importantly, starts realizing they don't need to get everything right. They just need to avoid big mistakes. And that shift in perspective lifts an enormous weight off their shoulders. This is where a simple concept comes in that changes everything. Saved money isn't meant to be admired. It's meant to be used strategically, not used impulsively, but used with intention. When you understand that the relationship changes, money stops being a fragile trophy and becomes a sturdy tool. Something that's there to protect you, not to judge you. But for that to work, you need to stop treating every expense as a failure. There are expenses that prevent bigger losses. There are expenses that buy time. There are expenses that preserve your mental energy. And when you learn to identify those expenses, guilt starts to fade. You no longer feel like you're sabotaging everything with every decision. You start to feel like you're choosing, and choice is very different from reaction. Reaction is when you do something because you have no alternative. Choice is when you understand the impact and decide anyway. People who are more financially calm aren't those who never spend, but those who know why they're spending. They're not trying to be perfect. They're trying to be consistent. At this point in the journey, the person starts to realize that saving doesn't mean living stuck. It means reducing the number of bad surprises. It means building ground firm enough not to collapse with every stumble. And the firmer that ground becomes, the less energy you spend trying to keep your balance. That's exactly why, after a certain point, saving gets easier. Not because more money automatically appears, but because more clarity does. You stop making decisions in the dark. You stop acting on impulse. You stop emotionally compensating with consumption. Money starts to follow a more predictable flow, and life follows along. But before reaching this lighter phase, there's an important adjustment that almost everyone ignores. Most people try to save by attacking the final amount, the big number, when in reality they should be attacking the process. They should be building a system that works even in bad months, even when motivation drops, even when an unexpected expense shows up. Because the truth is simple and hard at the same time. You won't be motivated every month. You won't be disciplined every day. You won't make good decisions all the time. And any plan that depends on that is doomed to fail. Not out of malice, but out of human reality. That's why the people who manage to reach 10,000 aren't the smartest, the most organized, or the most controlled. They're the ones who created a system that works, even when they're tired. A system that reduces choices, that automates decisions, that protects them from their own impulses. And this is where the formula really starts to take shape. Not as a set of rigid rules, but as a simple structure that takes weight off your head and puts money to work in your favor. A structure that turns chaotic months into predictable months, that turns fear into margin, that turns tension into clarity. In the next section, I'm going to show you how to build this structure step by step, starting with the most neglected point of all, the one that determines whether you'll cross the anxiety threshold or stay stuck in it for years without realizing it. I tease a small change in how you organize money, but with a huge psychological impact. The first thing that needs to be clear before any practical adjustment is that you're not going to organize your financial life by trying to control everything. Total control is an illusion that only generates frustration. The feeling of real control comes when a few important things are protected, and the rest can flow without causing panic. Almost everyone's mistake is trying to monitor every detail while ignoring the points that actually cause emotional chaos. The most neglected point of all is the functional separation of money. Not separating by pretty names, but by role in your life. While all the money stays in the same place, your head keeps treating everything as survival. There's no future, no strategy, just fear of running out. It's like trying to organize an entire house by throwing everything into the same room. You might store it, but you never feel relief. When you start separating money by function, something simple happens. The brain understands that not everything is at risk at the same time. One part is for living. Another is for absorbing shocks. Another is for growing slowly. This reduces mental noise. You stop asking yourself all the time, what if I need it? Because the answer is already defined before the question even appears. And here it's important to understand something without romanticizing it in the beginning. This separation isn't about big amounts. It's about clarity, even if it's little. Just knowing which money can be touched and which shouldn't already pulls you out of constant improvisation. Improvising is exhausting. Having a minimal script is relieving. Most people do the opposite. They lump everything together, set a distant goal, and try to resist life. That creates internal conflict. You start seeing every expense as a betrayal of the plan. And nobody sustains a plan that feels like it's punishing them all the time. A good system doesn't require you to be strong. It requires you to be honest about your limits. Another fundamental adjustment is to stop trying to save what's left over. That sounds logical, but it's a trap. When you leave saving for whatever is left, you never know how much will be left. And when you don't know, the brain assumes the worst. It spends first, it protects itself. It anticipates scarcity. And when the end of the month comes, there really is nothing left. When saving happens first, even if it's a small amount, the game changes. Not because the amount is big, but because the decision has already been made. You don't have to argue with yourself every month. You don't have to negotiate. You don't have to resist. The system decides for you, and you just live within what's left. This drastically reduces mental wear. And here comes a truth that's uncomfortable but freeing. You don't need to save a lot to start changing your relationship with money. You need to save in a constant and predictable way. Predictability is what calms the brain. It's what allows planning. It's what takes you out of reactive mode. A small amount, well placed, is worth more than a larger amount saved chaotically. At this point, a lot of people ask, but how much do I need to save for this to make a difference? The honest answer is less than you imagined. As long as that money has a clear function. The mistake is thinking that only when you reach thousands does something change. In practice, the change starts when you realize that a small surprise won't completely knock you down anymore. This is the beginning of crossing the anxiety threshold. When money starts doing its job of cushioning life, when you realize you don't need to solve everything in panic mode anymore. When you understand you're no longer completely exposed, That feeling doesn't come from the final number, it comes from structure. And as this structure repeats month after month, something curious happens. Money starts to grow almost in the background. You're no longer obsessed with checking the balance. You're no longer counting every cent in fear. The focus shifts away from money and back to life. And ironically, that's when money starts accumulating more consistently. Because now you're not trying to save out of desperation. You're saving out of organization. You're not trying to rescue yourself. You're building margin. And margin changes everything. Margin gives you time. Margin gives you options. Margin lets you make small mistakes without destroying yourself. That's how 10,000 stops looking like a distant monster and becomes a natural consequence. Not of a heroic effort, but of a simple system repeated long enough. The person who gets there almost never notices the exact moment. One day they look back and realize they stopped living on the edge a long time ago. But before closing this logic, there's one last mental adjustment that needs to happen, and it's decisive. As long as you see saved money as something that could be lost at any moment, you'll act out of fear. As long as you see it as something that's there to be used intelligently, you'll start acting calmly. Money isn't there to never be touched. It's there to prevent bad decisions, to stop exhaustion from running your life, to turn urgency into choice. And when you use money this way, it fulfills its most important psychological role. In the next section, I'm going to tie all of this together into a simple, practical, repeatable formula that any ordinary person can apply. Even earning little, even with bad months, even without constant motivation, and then, yes, 10,000 will stop being an abstract goal and become a clear path. The formula starts to become clear when you understand that saving $10,000 isn't an event, it's a side effect of a less chaotic financial life. Nobody wakes up one day and simply decides to save that amount in a linear, perfect way. What exists is a process where money stops leaking through the wrong places and starts accumulating almost quietly. The first pillar of this formula is accepting that you won't optimize everything at once. Anyone who tries to fix their entire financial life at once burns out quickly. The brain goes into resistance mode. Everything feels heavy. That's why the formula doesn't start by cutting everything, depriving yourself of everything, or making unrealistic promises. It starts by choosing one single thing to protect your monthly margin. Margin is the space between what comes in and what goes out. Even if that space is small at first, it has to exist. Without margin, any plan is just theory. And here's the most important detail. That margin can't depend on your mood, your discipline, or your motivation. It needs to happen automatically before money becomes temptation, before money becomes a decision. When that margin is created, as soon as money comes in, the rest of the month behaves differently. You stop spending hoping something will be left. You start living within what you already know you can spend. That reduces anxiety because it eliminates surprise. The brain likes predictability. Even if it's tight, predictable is less exhausting than unpredictable. The second pillar of the formula is giving each part of the money a clear name. Not a pretty name, a functional one. Money for living, money for cushioning problems, money for growing. When you do this, you stop treating everything as survival. An unexpected expense stops feeling like the end of the world because it already has a place to happen. And here, a subtle but powerful shift occurs. You start using the cushioning money without guilt when you need to, because you understand it exists for that. And by using it without guilt, you avoid using credit cards, avoid unnecessary installments, avoid silent interest that eats away months of effort. In other words, using the right money at the right time saves you more in the long run, even if in the short term it seems like the opposite. The third pillar is reducing repetitive decisions. Every financial decision consumes mental energy. When you have to decide every month how much to save, whether you can spend, whether you should wait, you wear yourself down. The formula eliminates those decisions. Everything that can be automatic becomes automatic. Everything that can be predictable becomes predictable. And that frees up mental space. When that space appears, you start noticing patterns that used to go unnoticed. Small leaks, expenses that don't bring real relief, emotional compensations that last a few minutes and cost weeks of peace. And most importantly, you start cutting those things not out of obligation, but because they stop making sense. That's when money starts being left over more often. Not because you became a different person, but because the environment changed. The formula doesn't try to change who you are. It changes the path the money takes. And when the path changes, the result changes with it. As the months go by, something curious happens. That save amount starts to pass the first few thousand. And unlike the beginning, this no longer generates the same fear. Money starts to feel more solid, less fragile. You realize you've already been through surprises and didn't go back to zero. That you've already used part of the reserve and managed to rebuild it. This real experience is what changes your head, not theory. This is the threshold that almost nobody crosses because almost nobody reaches it organized. But when you cross it, anxiety drops dramatically. Money stops being a judge and becomes support. And from there, the pace changes. Not because you save more, but because you stop losing so much. $10,000 stop being a distant dream and become a milestone on the path. Something you know will arrive if you keep doing the basics well, without rush, without suffering, without internal war, just repeating the system. And when that amount finally shows up in your life, the biggest change is in the balance. It's in your posture. You negotiate better. You accept fewer bad situations. You make decisions more calmly. You stop living in firefighting mode. Money doesn't solve everything, but it buys something priceless to me to think. And thinking calmly changes everything. It changes career choices. It changes relationships. It changes boundaries. It changes how you see yourself. You stop feeling constantly behind, always owing, always running, and you start feeling like you're finally building something real. In the next section, I'm going to close this journey by showing how to keep this system working in the long term, how to avoid emotional relapses, and how to use this accumulated money without destroying everything you've built. It's the point where a person stops just saving and starts feeling in control of their financial life. When the system really starts working, the biggest challenge stops being saving and becomes not sabotaging what's been built. And that almost never happens because of lack of money. It happens because of unresolved emotions tied to your financial past. The person improves their life, but keeps treating themselves like someone who's broke. They keep acting as if everything could collapse at any moment, even when the facts show otherwise. It's common at this stage for a new fear to appear. Not the fear of not having, but the fear of losing control again. The person thinks, what if I relax too much? What if I spend wrong? What if I go back to zero? That fear is understandable, because anyone who's lived under pressure learns to protect themselves. The problem is when that protection turns into excessive rigidity. Too much rigidity also destroys systems, because life isn't stable. There will always be a worse month, an off-script expense, a decision that wasn't perfect, and the system needs to survive that without breaking you emotionally. The goal was never to create a perfect financial life, it was to create a resilient one. Financial resilience is when you make a mistake and don't destroy yourself. When you spend and don't panic. When you use the reserve and don't feel like everything is over. When you understand that money is doing its job, and that understanding doesn't come all at once. It comes from repeating real experiences where you see that the world didn't end because you used what you saved. This is where many people make a dangerous mistake. When they see money growing, they start treating it as identity, as proof of personal worth, as something that can't be touched under any circumstances. And that brings fear back in through the back door. Money becomes a source of tension again, not relief. The formula only works in the long run when you maintain a functional relationship with money. It's not a trophy. It's not an emotional shield. It's not a judge of your worth. It's a tool. And tools exist to be used when necessary, without drama, without guilt, without self. Another important point at this stage is learning to live with healthy financial boredom. After chaos decreases, financial life becomes boring. There are no more constant scares, no more big emotions. And that's good. But for someone who lived on the edge for a long time, that calm can feel strange, almost wrong. The person misses the adrenaline, even if they don't realize it. That's when subtle temptations appear. Spending to break the routine, decisions to feel alive. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying life. The problem is using consumption as an emotional regulator. The system needs to account for that. It needs to leave room for pleasure without guilt, without losing control, without sabotage. That's why maintaining the system isn't about tightening more, it's about adjusting better, about revisiting numbers from time to time, about making sure money for living still exists, about not turning discipline into punishment. The more sustainable the system, the less willpower it requires. Over time, something very important happens. You start trusting yourself financially. Not because you never mess up, but because, you can reorganize. That trust changes everything. You stop seeing yourself as bad with money and start seeing yourself as someone in progress, someone who learns, someone who improves. And when that identity changes, behavior follows. You no longer need to police yourself all the time. You don't need to make grand promises. You just keep going. Month after month, year after year. And when you realize it, 10,000 is already behind you. It became a base. It became ground. The most curious thing is that when you reach this point, the obsession with the number disappears. The focus shifts to quality of life, peace of mind, better choices. Money becomes a means, not an end. And that's exactly why it keeps growing. Without suffering, without war, without constant anxiety. This is the real transformation that almost nobody shows. It's not about getting rich fast. It's about stopping suffering slowly. It's about leaving survival mode and entering building mode. It's about treating financial problems as logistics, not as a threat to your dignity. This is the real transformation that almost nobody shows. It's not about getting rich fast. It's about stopping suffering slowly. It's about leaving survival mode and entering building mode. It's about treating financial problems as logistics, not as a threat to your dignity. In the next and final section, I'm going to tie this whole journey together, reinforce the mindset shift, make clear what really made the difference, and close with a direct call to anyone who made it this far. It's the moment to consolidate everything and give a real sense of closure. If you look calmly at everything that's been said so far, you'll notice that at no point did the change come from a trick, a miraculous promise, or an extreme sacrifice. It came from something much simpler and much harder at the same time. Stopping the fight against your own financial life and starting to organize chaos, honestly. The biggest shift wasn't learning how to save money. It was stopping living in a permanent state of alert. It was leaving the logic of surviving month to month and entering the logic of building margin. It was understanding that money no longer needed to be an emotional problem every single day that it could. Just be a quiet tool working in the background while you live. Saving $10,000 in the end isn't about reaching a specific number. It's about becoming someone who can deal with surprises without panicking. It's about being able to sleep without that endless internal conversation of what if it goes wrong. It's about waking up knowing that life can get tight, but it won't crush you at the first stumble. When you create a simple, predictable human system, money starts stopping in places where it used to leak out. You don't need to become a different person. You don't need to earn much more. You don't need to punish yourself. You just need to stop improvising everything all the time. And when improvisation decreases, mental wear decreases along with it. Most important of all is understanding that you weren't failing before. You were just trying to live without a shock absorber. Anyone breaks like that, anyone gets tired, anyone gives up. The problem was never lack of ability. It was lack of structure. And when that structure appears, even if it's simple, something changes inside. You start respecting yourself more. You start treating yourself with less harshness. You start seeing progress where you used to see only delay. And that internal change is worth more than any number on a statement. $10,000 isn't the final prize. It's the sign that you left survival mode, that you built ground, that now problems are solved with decisions, not desperation. And when you reach that point, financial life stops being a constant weight and becomes something manageable, almost boring. And that's freedom. If you've made it this far, it's because something resonated. Maybe you recognized yourself in more parts of this story than you'd like. Maybe you felt relief realizing you're not alone, that you're not weak, that you're not incapable. And that alone is already a huge beginning. Now, if this content helped you organize your head, see money differently, and feel like there's finally a possible path, I'll ask you for 3 simple things. Leave a like because that shows the algorithm that this kind of conversation needs to reach more people who are suffering in silence. Subscribe to the channel because here we talk about money the way nobody else does, without shame, without fantasy, and without pressure. and comment the word asterisk, asterisk margin, asterisk, asterisk below. If you made it to the end, comment asterisk, asterisk margin, asterisk, asterisk, so I know you watched everything and that this shift made sense to you. See you in the next video. In the next and final section, I'm going to tie this whole journey together, reinforce the mindset shift, make clear what really made the difference, and close with a direct call to anyone who made it this far. It's the moment to consolidate everything and give a real sense of closure. If you look calmly at everything that's been said so far, you'll notice that at no point did the change come from a trick, a miraculous promise, or an extreme sacrifice. It came from something much simpler and much harder at the same time. Stopping the fight against your own financial life and starting to organize chaos honestly. The biggest shift wasn't learning how to save money. It was stopping living in a permanent state of alert. It was leaving the logic of surviving month to month and entering the logic of building margin. It was understanding that money no longer needed to be an emotional problem every single day, that it could just be a quiet tool working in the background while you live. Saving $10,000, in the end, isn't about reaching a specific number. It's about becoming someone who can deal with surprises without panicking. It's about being able to sleep without that endless internal conversation of what if it goes wrong. It's about waking up knowing that life can get tight, but it won't crush you at the first stumble. When you create a simple, predictable human system, money starts stopping in places where it used to leak out. You don't need to become a different person. You don't need to earn much more. You don't need to punish yourself. You just need to stop improvising everything all the time. And when improvisation decreases, mental wear decreases along with it. Most important of all is understanding that you weren't failing before. You were just trying to live without a shock absorber. Anyone breaks like that. Anyone gets tired. Anyone gives up. The problem was never lack of ability. It was lack of structure. And when that structure appears, even if it's simple, something changes inside. You start respecting yourself more. You start treating yourself with less harshness. You start seeing progress where you used to see only delay. And that internal change is worth more than any number on a statement. $10,000 isn't the final prize. It's the sign that you left survival mode, that you built ground, that now problems are solved with decisions, not desperation. And when you reach that point, financial life stops being a constant weight and becomes something manageable, almost boring. And that's freedom. If you made it this far, it's because something resonated. Maybe you recognized yourself in more parts of this story than you'd like. Maybe you felt relief realizing you're not alone, that you're not weak, that you're not incapable. And that alone is already a huge beginning. Now, if this content helped you organize your head, see money differently, and feel like there's finally a possible path, I'll ask you for 3 simple things. Leave a like because that shows the algorithm that this kind of conversation needs to reach more people who are suffering in silence. Subscribe to the channel because here we talk about money the way nobody else does, without shame, without fantasy, and without pressure. And comment the word asterisk, asterisk margin, asterisk, asterisk below. If you've made it to the end, comment asterisk, asterisk margin, asterisk, asterisk. So I know you watched everything and that this shift made sense to you. See you in the next video.